This episode of The Therapy Show is sponsored by Therapy Notes. Why not find out what more than 100,000 mental health professionals already know and try Therapy Notes for 2 months absolutely free? Just click on the link in the show notes or enter promo code LISA at therapynotes.com. Welcome to the Therapy Show podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Mustard. In each episode, I interview a seasoned and knowledgeable talk therapist from the counseling world to glean valuable insights, techniques, and tools that you can apply to your practice and your life. And if you're considering a career in the counseling field or just want to hear about what it's like to be a talk therapist, then this is the podcast for you. Today, I have a truly special guest, an award-winning author, a captivating speaker, a dedicated teacher, and a sought-after consultant. Dr. Avrum Weiss has left an indelible mark on the world of psychotherapy. Nationally celebrated for his pioneering efforts in experiential psychotherapy and his revolutionary insights into the theory of change, Dr. Weiss has not only shaped the field, but has also mentored hundreds, introducing them to a more personal relational model of psychotherapy. In recent years, he's turned his attention to a topic that's both intriguing and essential: understanding the internal lives of men and the intricate dynamics between men and women. In his latest book, Hidden in Plain Sight: How Men's Fears of Women Shape Their Intimate Relationships, he offers profound insights into this very subject. And when he's not penning transformative works or guiding the next generation of therapists, you can find him enjoying the serene beauty of an island in the mid-coast of Maine, accompanied by his wife and their loyal canine companion. So without further ado, let's dive into the conversation with the remarkable Dr. Avrum Weiss. But before we hear from Avrum, are you looking for continuing education contact hours? And do you want to learn while you're on the go? Because for a limited time, you can grab 15 NBCC approved contact hours for just $30. And you can explore the offerings over on my website, which is lisamustard.com/podcourses. Buy the pod course bundle today and enjoy future pod courses added to your bundle at zero extra cost. Act fast because that bundle price is going to go up soon. And I'm in the process of crafting an ethics pod course set to launch this fall. Ensure you seize this opportunity today. And if you're curious about pod courses, imagine a podcast blended with a self-study course. You can listen at your convenience, and when you're set, take a brief quiz, finish the evaluation assessment, and then claim your certificate. Once again, to see all of the pod course offerings, head over to lisamustard.com/podcourses. Well, hey, friends, welcome back to another episode of The Therapy Show. This week's guest is Dr. Avrum Weiss. Welcome to the podcast. It is so
Thank
great
you.
to have you.
Good to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited. We were kind of chit-chatting before we hit record that I've seen you speak, I want to say at least 2 times when you've come to Columbia, South Carolina to present the Learning Consortium. Is that what?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
TLC. That's what it is.
Right.
And most recently, you were also here for the South Carolina Marriage and Family Therapy Association meeting, which unfortunately I wasn't able to attend. So you were well in my sphere of influence. Like I look to you. I've been following you for a while. Can you share with our listeners like who you are, what you do, and how you help therapists, I guess?
Well, that's a great question. It would seem a straightforward question, but depending on which day you ask me, probably most days I would say I'm a therapist who writes, but there are probably also other days I'd say I'm an author who does therapy. So that sort of goes back and forth. But I've always been someone who was really interested in ideas, and particularly interested in ideas that our field passes over and assumes that everyone understands, but we don't really look into. So my book before this one was a book about change in psychotherapy, which if you look into it, you'll see there's very little literature in the field about how change happens. And I don't understand that. I don't understand how I can be a therapist and not be thinking about change. So this book also was an idea that once you start thinking about it, it seems obvious, and everywhere you look, like you said, your husband was like, oh, that's interesting. Yeah. But again, you know, there was some stuff written about it 100 years ago, and then largely we've been silent about it.
Right. Yeah. So I want to ask a little bit more about your history and about your training, because I know you've trained with, so can you share where you did your work, your schooling, and then who you trained
Sure.
under once you were done with that.
Well, I have been very fortunate. I first of all did my doctorate at Georgia State University, which at the time was really sort of one of the premier
Mhm.
psychology training programs in the country. And while I was there, I connected with Dick Felder, who was one of the originators with Carl Whitaker of experiential psychotherapy. Dick and I made a very strong connection, and I outrageously, as a like second year graduate student, we had an all-day workshop at his house, and he pulled out this notebook full of like scraps of paper and napkins and things, and it said on a label, "How I do psychotherapy." And I said, well, very presumptuously, I said, if you ever need help with that, I had a dream last night that you died without ever having published your work. And I didn't know that Dick is someone who lived his life by his dreams. And so that was a compelling experience for him. And he and I spent 7 years together working on and then publishing what was only the second book ever written about experiential psychotherapy.
Very cool. Very cool. And I could be wrong, but I believe my supervisor back when I was, out of grad school and working on my supervision hours, you might know him, Russ Haber. Do you know
Yeah,
Russ?
sure. Russ
Yeah.
is the first person to bring me to
Yeah.
Columbia. I thought I gave a talk at the counseling center.
Right. Yeah. That was probably before my time, but man, he was an he is an
Absolutely.
experiential therapist.
Yes.
And I remember just like being in supervision, like, well, I don't get it. Like, what does that mean? Like, what does that look like? Because you learn about these things in grad school, but I
Yeah.
think until you actually, go through it,
Right.
it's hard to, get a grasp on it. So yeah, I think that's fabulous. How would you describe, because I do have listeners that are just people who are interested in the topic of therapy. So how would you maybe in a couple sentences explain what experiential psychotherapy is?
The clearest explanation that I've ever written of experiential is in the book Change Happens.
Okay.
And I would say that experiential psychotherapy is based on what seems obvious, but is actually a profound idea that change happens only at the level of lived experience. There's a great quote by Darwin, who was in Chile for like an earthquake that devastated the whole country. And he said something like, yeah, like you really think you understand an earthquake until you live through one.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I would say about psychotherapy, is that we've gotten pretty distracted with thinking that you can think your way
Yeah.
to changing yourself. But I think my experience at least suggests that at some level, therapy has to be an experience in which you experience things differently. And that's primarily done through a in-depth relationship with another person, in this case, a therapist.
Yeah. I love that. I think that's
You-
just so cool.
Yeah, you can't just talk the talk.
Right. Yeah. And I remember now that you bring that up, I do remember sitting in supervision with Russ or something and him saying to us group of, glossy, excited
Right.
therapists, like, how do you believe change happens? And we were all like, ooh, that's a good question. And I think we
I,
all
I'd like to
knew.
I'd like to think, I hope he got that question from me, because it's a question I've always asked at the start of working with a
Yeah.
new therapist. And what's sad is how rarely any therapist has ever said to me, "Oh, I've already thought about that." Mostly it's a question that catches people off guard. And again, I don't see how you can help people change if you haven't kind of thought through for yourself how that happens and what your role in it is.
Yeah. Which kind of brings me to the idea of all these, people coming into the grad programs of therapy and counseling so young, without so many lived life experiences, coming in and looking to these professors saying, "Teach me how to do therapy," where it's like, okay, that seems like almost, are we ready for that at 22, 23 years old? And I'm sure we could probably have a debate back and forth about that. I don't know. What do you think?
Jung had an opinion about that. Jung said directly he didn't think you could be a good therapist until you're middle aged.
Yeah. Well, I just turned 50, so I'm pretty sure my
Qualified.
therapist, well, at this point, I feel like I could go into private practice and just like, I'd kill it. But
Mhm.
I don't know. I think about it every now and then. And I'd say that jokingly. I don't know because I haven't done it in a while, and it would take some, kind of gearing back up for that
Yeah,
and doing my own therapy and kind of getting back into that
right.
process. But so definitely you have the book, the one about change for sure. And then you have a new book out called
Yes.
Hidden in Plain Sight: Why
Yes.
Men fear women. Did I get it right?
How men's
Okay.
fears of women shape their intimate relationships.
Thank you. Okay. What what spurred you to write that book?
Well, as most therapists know, and since I'm speaking mostly to therapists, there's a strange phenomena that happens that I certainly don't understand why. But most therapists will tell you that whatever we're working on in our own lives starts walking through the door,
Mhm.
which is annoying and helpful. So I went through a period of my life, I went through a divorce, and all of a sudden, men started coming into my office. And as most therapists know, that's not so common. So it got to the point where I would have entire days seeing only men.
Mhm.
And I started listening to men, and mostly what they did was complain to me about their relationships, the things they didn't like about their partner or they didn't like about their relationship. And I would sort of naively ask, well, have you talked with her about this? And I got the same reaction every time. They looked at me like I had just asked the stupidest question in the world. And it was obvious to me that they were afraid to talk to their partners about the things that bothered them most. In fact, one guy I worked with went through an entire divorce, and I know for a fact he never said to his now ex-wife, here's why I don't want to stay in this. She never knew. It came out of the sky, and he was never able to say to her. So I started saying to guys, it sounds like you're afraid of your wife or your girlfriend or your partner. And the reaction was almost always the same. First, they would bow up and get defensive because I just said you're scared of a woman, which is insulting to most men. But within literally a minute or two, you could see the recognition come over their face. And then everything changed from there. We would sort of go back through the same territory that we'd been getting nowhere on, and everything started to make sense when we thought through that lens. So a lot of behavior, stereotypical behavior that women are critical of men about or men struggle with, starts to look very different when you understand it as a reaction to fear.
Okay. Makes sense. And I can understand that. I mean, I see that a good bit in the work that I do and in my
Yeah.
own, relationships. Um, so so how did you write a book around this though? Like what were you drawing from or um I mean, do you have research or how do you put this together and make it make sense? And one more question, is this book for therapists or is this book for anybody out there who is dealing with this issue?
Anybody out there.
Okay.
And one of the things that's important to say is there may be women listening now thinking that I wrote a book for men, and that is absolutely not true. I had the opportunity to do a workshop with an interesting format. We met for 3 days, and then 4 months later, the same group met again
Okay.
for 3 days.
Okay.
And during those 4 months, it was overwhelmingly the women who had made the most change in their relationships. And what the women said was that a lot of things I've been angry, upset, and critical with my husband about, I now feel compassionate about. In fact, I have a quote here. I'll read you a quick quote from one of the women in that workshop. She said, I understand that my husband has not been ignoring, dismissing, or hurting me out of a lack of respect, as I suspected, but that he's scared to hurt me, scared to mess up with me, scared to not be enough. I had honestly never imagined that he was scared and that I was so profoundly important to him that he was constantly terrified I would leave him. So that's a profound shift because women often believe, since most people's primary reaction to fear is to withdraw.
Mm-hmm.
And so women see the withdrawal. Women make overtures for connection and get withdrawal in response. And so they conclude, understandably, but incorrectly, that the men are not interested in being close with them. They're not interested in being close to the family. But it's not about a lack of interest. It's about a profoundly important interest in connection. It's just terrifying to men.
Wow. Wow. Okay. So that's where you got the research for the
Yeah.
book and all these, anecdotal
Yes.
story. Okay. Wow, that's an amazing quote and an amazing revelation that she had. Wow. So, I mean, I can't help but think about the attachment wounds that we each have coming into our, potential marriages or partnerships.
Yes.
And is that something that you would explore with your patients? And
Absolutely.
okay. Okay.
So there are a number of theories about why this is the case, but the one that makes the most sense to me is that most people, their primary attachment as an infant and young child is with a woman.
Mm-hmm.
It's getting to be more even, but it is still true for most people who are adult now. Your primary emotional relationship was with a woman, and so that meant you had all your eggs in one basket. And so children become experts at scanning their mothers very carefully for any sign of an interruption in attachment. And they become very focused on, is mom still with me? Is she still taking care of me? Does mom still approve of me? And so, we sometimes joke about that. If mom ain't happy, nobody's happy. And what happens is these babies grow up and become men and just shift right into, if I'm forgetting the adult version, happy wife, happy life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so it's really the same dynamic. And just as most children don't have an emotionally present father to sort of balance the equation, most men don't have other intimate relationships with men or other women. And so again, they're back in that same situation of being very threatened because they have all their eggs in the basket of their partner.
Wow. Wow. Okay. Yeah. I can see that. I mean, I know I've experienced that personally, just kind of,
Yeah.
All right. So what do we do? Or what's the remedy, I guess, for these guys?
Well, to my surprise, and this is something I learned through being wrong, um, I started doing groups for just men about 15 years ago. And I remember when I started thinking, this is the worst idea I've ever had as a therapist. This is going to be painful. Because in mixed groups, men typically lag behind the women in terms of being able to talk about themselves, being open, being vulnerable. So I thought, with no women in the room, they're going to talk about sports, they're going to talk about business, they're going to talk about politics. I've never been more wrong. The men in my men's groups are the only groups. I've been running groups for 50 years. The groups I do with only men are the only groups I have ever done where people look each other in the eye on a regular basis and talk about loving each other.
Wow.
So what I learned is men are actually, counter to the stereotype, men are actually dying for someone to talk to. And when you get women out of the room, they're not as bad at it as you think they are.
Right.
And they actually take to it very quickly. And so the answer to your question is, counterintuitively, I think for most men, the best place to start is with talking to other men because it's less threatening.
Sure. Well, that makes sense. I mean, I can understand that, and I can see that for sure. That's interesting though, because did you run groups for women too?
And I've never run a group for
Okay.
just women because I wouldn't really feel qualified, but I've been running mixed groups for 50 years.
Yeah.
But the difference in groups with just men, between just men group and mixed group, I never imagined that it would be as different as it is.
Yeah. What a great thing to have, to see them, and I have a colleague locally who does, a group for men, when it comes to addiction, and he would probably, say the same thing. I think
I bet.
he's very fond of what happens in his men's groups. I mean, that's his favorite thing to do, is to run those groups. Okay.
It's an incredibly rewarding thing to do because, how often, where was I? I was recently in I was with a group of people, and somebody's parents came, and they live in a very rural area, and they live on a farm, they're farmers, and everyone else were more professional people, better educated. And I could just see that the dad was just sure he wasn't going to have a good time. And I liked him, and we got involved in a conversation. In fact, I used to live near where he lived, and you could just see him warm up. It's like the sun came out because he went there thinking, here's another experience where I'm not going to have anybody to talk to. I'm just going to sit in the corner and not have any fun. And then when he made a connection with me, it just lit him up. He was so happy to have someone to talk with. And I think that's often true.
Try Therapy Notes, the #1 rated electronic health record system available today. With live telephone support 7 days a week, it's clear why Therapy Notes is rated 4.9 out of 5 stars on Trustpilot.com and Google. Therapy Notes makes billing, scheduling, note-taking, and telehealth incredibly easy. And now, for all you prescribers out there, Therapy Notes is proudly introducing ePrescribe. And if you're coming from another electronic health record, Therapy Notes makes the transition quite simple, importing your demographic data free of charge so you can get going right away. So why not find out what more than 100,000 mental health professionals already know and try Therapy Notes for 2 months absolutely free. Just click on the link in the show notes or enter the promo code Lisa at therapynotes.com. Try it today with no strings attached and see why everyone is switching to Therapy Notes. Yeah, no, I agree. And I can only speak from what I noticed with my husband. But I have seen and heard he would not like to attend certain things because of who's going to be there. But I'm like, oh, but
Right.
so-and-so might be there and you get along with him. And oh
Right.
yeah, okay, I can, so I do find that interesting.
But see, that's what you just said is very important, and it happens a lot. And you probably didn't even notice it.
No,
But you're managing his relationships.
right.
And men don't realize the extent. Women are taught to do that, and you probably do it very well. And you do it so seamlessly that he doesn't even notice you're doing it. And they usually don't find out until they get divorced.
Oh,
And men, when they think about getting divorced, think, oh, my social life is great. So it's going to, and then they find out that somebody's been managing it for them the whole time. And without that person there, they don't have any friends.
wow. I never thought about it like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I guess because it's just how we work, how we balance each other out, or we've negotiated, I guess, that part of our social life. I don't know.
Women learn that if they are going to have a social life, they're going to have to help their husband find a way to enjoy it. So it's as much for their own benefit, because let's say, you have a good friend and you want to spend more time with your good friend. Well, the easiest way to do that is if the husbands get along. So you facilitate that so that you can spend more time with the couple.
I'll tell you, probably the hardest relationship is when the husbands get along and the wives don't.
But that's really telling, isn't it?
Right.
So when the wives get along, that's enough glue to hold it together. Right. But if it's the husband and the wives don't, it doesn't usually work as well. That's a really good point.
You have to navigate. You have to make it work. You have to figure it out. If the relationship for them is so important, Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess there's so many little things I do every day that I don't even know I'm doing, that we've worked out. Okay. What do you say to the couple that they're not happy? They're together for convenience because maybe their idea is we're better together for the kids. But they want to work on things. They would like to have better. What do you suggest to them?
Well, fortunately, there's been a really big change in couples therapy in the last, let's say, 10, 20 years. When I was coming up in my training, couples therapy was almost like mediation. Sure. It's like conflict resolution. Like you would ask them what they were fighting about, and you'd sort of like, well, why don't we watch your shows 2 nights a week and your shows it? And not surprisingly, that wasn't terribly helpful. And really, I think it wouldn't be too strong a word to say the revolution in couples therapy is that we've all learned, I think, to work with couples on their strengths rather than trying to negotiate their weaknesses. And what I've learned is that people are together for a reason. And if they've been married for 20 years, something worked at some point. They were attracted to each other. They fell in love with each other. And so a lot of the ways that I think about working with couples now are, let's find out where you went off the rails. Let's go back and remember what it was that attracted you to each other enough to want to marry each other, and see if we can't reconnect. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. Obviously, it was already there at some point.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. That's great advice. I really like that.
So what I've been working on recently may be of interest to some of your listeners and to some of the people they work with. So I noticed that when you work with men, the thing that you most often hear is men talking about feeling criticized. Almost in any setting, when men get together with each other, pretty quickly they talk about feeling criticized. So they'll say, she keeps moving the bar. It doesn't matter how hard I try to please her. I'm never going to please her. She just keeps changing the rules. And so I got interested. Why do men feel that way so much? Like, are they imagining it, Or are women being critical in ways that are hard to see or that I don't understand? So probably about a year ago, I started asking women, both in workshops and in individual interviews. I started asking women, what did you learn from your mom about men?
Mm.
Not just in what she said to you, but in the ways she related to your dad, the way she taught you by modeling about how to relate to a man. So I'll ask you the question, what did you learn from your mom about men?
Do I really want to go there?
It's up to you. You certainly don't have to.
I learned, well, I probably, and I will come back and say that I picked my husband or found him and fell in love with him for the complete opposite reasons that what my mother taught me about men.
Yeah.
That and I think she's changed over the years, and maybe it's just, the I call it trauma that, we experienced as kids because I'm a child of divorced parents. Um, and I don't want to throw my mom under the bus because she listens to the show and she's a great mom. But probably when I think back to that time in my life is not so much about men, but about you. Well, I guess so. You can't they might leave you.
Right. Can't rely
They're
on them.
can't rely on them. They change. They're not the man that
Right.
they can change and not always for the good. You have to rely on yourself to
Yep.
take care of
Yep.
things. But at the same time, because of that, I learned that I have to do everything because I
Yeah.
had a mom who did everything. So that's what I knew because my father was very absent from my childhood. Yeah. And what else did I learn? That's probably enough.
Well, not surprisingly, your answers line up overwhelmingly with what I'm hearing from most women. I'm hearing don't trust men,
Mhm.
don't rely on them, make sure
Mhm.
you can take care of yourself, and don't expect to be emotionally close with a man. That's what friends are for. And
Mm.
so then I understand men's feeling criticized. So I think that's sort of in the air in a lot of heterosexual couples. And I think the women are often not aware of it. And the men sense it, they feel the criticism, but they can't put their finger on. And so, again, I think this is an idea that will be very helpful to couples. And right now, I'm working on a new book about this, and I'm interviewing women. If any of the people listening now are interested in being interviewed for this book, you can go to my website, which is avrumweissphd.com. Send me an email through there, and I'd be happy to set up a time to talk with you.
Great. Okay. And we'll put that link in the show notes. So if you didn't catch
Great.
it, yeah, we'll put that
Great.
in there. Yeah. So your next book will be, I guess, an addendum to what you're not an addendum, but like
Like an extension.
extension. Thank you. Yeah.
Right.
I would be really curious to read that book. But at the same time, I am very aware of what I say to, because we have two daughters. So I'm very aware of how I talk about their father or my
Yeah.
husband, in front of them and what I try to explain things to them as appropriate as I can for their
Right.
age. Um, because I don't want them to have that perception of that men are that way because I had a completely different experience when
Yeah.
I finally met my husband and,
Yeah.
it was I had to go to therapy. I was so mixed up. Like I didn't
Yeah.
get it.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I mean it's pretty fascinating. And then you
Well,
wonder, go ahead, sorry.
I was going to say that to sort of come full circle, the reason women have those beliefs about men
Mhm.
is that through their own lived experience. So they've learned not to trust men because men haven't shown up for them. They learn not to rely on men because men haven't followed through. And they learn not to expect closeness from men because of so many times that men were not emotionally available. So guys earned every bit of that, but you can see how often couples are stuck in this sort of revolving door. One of the clues that you are, and a lot of people would say this, even they've been married 30, 40 years, they'll say, yeah, we're still having the same fights we had when we met. And the argument never seems to get anywhere. And I think it doesn't because they're not addressing these underlying issues.
Right. Is this work you think they can do on their own? Yeah.
Well, boy, that's a tough question. It's certainly, there's no reason to not try doing it on your own. But I think if you've been having the same fight for 40 years
Right.
or 20 years, I think it's unlikely that reading a book is going to change that.
I gotcha. Yeah.
I mean, I believe in books, but
Yeah,
I think there's a limit to how much
sure.
a book alone can do for you.
Yeah. And then there's that idea of, couples that have been married for so long. I mean, I remember my grandparents gosh, they were married 60 some years. And I remember asking my grandfather, like, what's the key to a happy marriage? And he just says, you just say, yes, dear. And you just nod your head and give her whatever she wants. And, and I thought, now I know it's deeper than that, right? I know that
Right.
there's much, but after 60 years of being together, I guess you just kind of figure out what's worth it and what isn't. And, your own
Absolutely.
mental health.
Yeah, I would say that more proactively. So
Mhm.
because I've been watching happily married couples, wherever I'm in a situation where there's a long-term, seemingly well-functioning marriage, I watch them very closely.
Mhm.
And I learned something very similar to what you're saying, is that people are nice to each other
Yeah.
and kind and gentle and courteous, and they don't snip at each other. They're clearly not, you've been with couples who are clearly in a difficult place and they make sort of really bad jokes about each other in public. And you know that they're acting out something that's going on in private. Couples who are happy don't do that.
Yeah. True. That's true. Yeah, that's a good point.
Something I didn't come up with, but other people have told me they're doing it, which I think is just a wonderful idea, which is that they are buying the book
Mhm.
and reading it together a chapter at a time. So they don't read ahead. They
Okay.
read chapter 1 and then they make time to sit and talk about it. Then they read chapter 2 and they make time to sit and talk about it. And both men and women love that, because for the women, it's like, I've been trying the whole time I've known you to understand you, and now I'm beginning to understand you. And for the men, it's, I keep trying to tell you this is what I'm like. Read this and you'll understand more. And so it's a great conversation starter and a way to help men and women understand each other better.
Okay. Well, I like that suggestion. So maybe
Mhm.
that could be a place for people to start if they're unsure if they
I
want to
think so.
jump into
Yeah.
therapy quite just yet. Okay. So we will put the link to your website and your books in the show
Great.
notes. So if you guys want to go ahead and check those out. Could you maybe address a little bit about addiction and uh, e- men's fears? Would that make sense to go in that direction a little
Um,
bit?
in this sense that a good friend of mine has a book coming out this year on addiction as an attachment disorder. And I
Okay.
think the evidence is pretty compelling that
Hmm.
the absence of attachment or impaired attachment are the primary cause of addiction. So in that sense, how things are going in your relationship would have a lot to do with how susceptible you are to addiction.
Okay. Okay. That makes sense. I can see
Mhm.
that. Okay. Well, is there anything else that you would like to share with our listeners today, or any?
The only other thing I would say was that if you go to the website, which you'll see in the show notes,
Mhm.
I encourage you to sign up for my mailing list. I will send you a free ebook about relationships. And I pride myself on, I answer every email within 24 hours. If you don't get a response from me, either I got really sick or I didn't get your email, and so resend it. But if you have questions about this topic or about men or relationships, I will respond.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. We will, like I said, put all that in the show notes. And are you just in private practice for your state, or are you licensed in other states you can
I
do
am
therapy?
licensed in other states, and I
Hmm.
do see people in different locations. I don't see a lot of new people now, but I do
Okay.
work with men who are interested in being in a therapy group, and
Okay.
sometimes couples.
Okay, great. Well, um, I appreciate that.
Yeah,
So, well, thank you for being here. This has
you're
just
very
been
welcome. It's
been
good to
wonderful.
reconnect.
Yeah, good to see you. The Therapy Show with Lisa Mustard is edited and engineered by Chelsea Weaver. If you're looking to start a podcast or ready to take the editing off of your plate, be sure to visit chelseaweaverpodcasting.com. It's important to stress that these episodes are not meant to take the place of any work you're doing with your therapist or doctor. In fact, please run these ideas by your counselor or doctor before you act on them to make sure you are ready for them or even a fit for the suggestions. I can't stress this enough that each person is unique and their situation is unique. So please talk to your doctor before starting anything new that we might be suggesting. And the Therapy Show with Lisa Mustard and the information provided by me is solely intended for informational and entertainment purposes and is not a substitute for advice, diagnosis, or treatment regarding medical or mental health conditions. Although I am a licensed marriage and family therapist, the views expressed on this site or any related content should not be taken for medical or psychiatric advice. Always consult your physician before making any decisions related to your physical or mental health. Well, that wraps up another episode of The Therapy Show with Lisa Mustard. I know there are hundreds of thousands of podcasts out there, and I'm thankful you've chosen to listen to mine.
Be sure to visit lisamustard.com to access the show notes and discover more fantastic content.
And I'd be grateful if you subscribe to the show. Thank you.